Good morning, everybody. Hello, it's Amanda Chadwick here, Senior Speaker at Peninsula Business Services. I have probably one sentence for you today, and that's hello and welcome winter. It's a terrible day today and very rainy, but we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about employment contracts, and we're going to talk about policies, procedures, what goes in a statement of main terms, what is a statement of main terms, and we've got about 45 minutes to get through this. What I will say to you is I'm giving you an overview on law today. So, you know, if you want something specifically written, you need help on that. So I'm giving you an overview. Remember that. I'm trying to meet everybody's and match everybody's needs today. But also what you've got to remember, the message from me going forward, excuse me, and always is the message. It's all about control, but at the same time, keeping staff, retention and growth. And you can achieve this by getting the right things in place. So we want every business to grow, and by getting the right policies and procedures in place, you can do this. So, excuse me, I'm coughing again. Right, okay, so let's start with the first slide. So what are contracts in the first place? The contract of employment is the agreement between the employer and the employee. It governs the relationship between the both parties, and it need not be in writing and can be implied from the surrounding circumstances. Let me just stop for a second and remind everybody whilst you're listening to me that don't struggle to make notes here, because these slides and the recording will be available later on YouTube. So make sure, you know, because I know that you can be writing lots of stuff down. I've tried to include as many notes as possible for you so that you can refer to the slides later on, but also at the same time what you've got is you've got the slides and the recording to refer to. So, okay, so let's start again. The contract of employment is the agreement between the employer and the employee. It governs the relationship between both the parties, and it need not be in writing and can be implied from the surrounding circumstances. A written contract could be one piece of paper or in differing forms, and failing to provide a written contract of employment results in a lack of clarity, since neither party knows the precise extent of their respective duties and obligations. And you must take the time to carefully prepare a contract of employment for each employee, and it helps minimise the risk over disputes and ambiguity about the employment relationship. And remember, each business has different needs and outlooks. The style and the content of the contract of employment will definitely differ. And also, as I'm sat here now, I pulled out lots of my documentation that I use, and I just thought I'd mention, you know, you have different handbooks for different people in some circumstances, and one example of that might be a worker handbook to give to your workers. And this brings us to workforce status again. A statement of main terms might be different for different people within your company. We've got full-time workers, part-time workers, we've got workers, we've got fixed-term contractors, temporary workers, self-employed, contract for services. So there's different types of contracts for different types of staff. But we're talking today about a general employed person, full or part-time. So what are contracts? Well, people refer to things known as terms and conditions, and these are written particulars that define the essential elements of an employment contract or the relationship between the employer and the employee. The terms and conditions, these include the place of work, rate of pay, annual leave, sickness, absence, public holidays, and the rest. But terms are agreed between the employer and the employee, but the conditions are instructed by the employer and must be adhered to during employment. And so to make this really simple for you, terms and conditions, this is if I was saying, you know, just speaking in simple terms and not in legal terms, terms are what are set between me and you when I take you on. So I'm employing you. This is your statement of main terms. This is the hours you work, in the rate of pay, your annual leave, what you do in sickness, public holidays, reference to rules, disciplinary rules and procedures, and the grievance procedure tells you your job title and who you're working for. That is your written terms. The conditions are what we call the employee handbook, and the conditions are things such as, you know, how you take your holiday, the rules surrounding it, and we're going to talk about that later on. So that's the terms, that's conditions. People are very protective of their terms of employment because that's what you agreed with them when you first took them on. So just remember that, terms and conditions. So Reasons for tribunals, because people haven't got rules in place, is number one. So no rules, that's why you end up having a tribunal. Don't just, if I'm listening to me now and you're thinking, I need contracts of employment, I need handbooks, I need health and safety policy, I need an accident book, I need posters up. Don't just tick the blooming boxes. Don't go down and go, yeah, got the handbook, got that equality policy, got the harassment policy. Don't just tick the box and never ever use it, because you'll end up having a problem. And also, when do you train your staff? Don't just put things in place and don't use them. Make sure you've got them in there. And the thing is, for example, you might have a policy such as a search policy, and you think, yes, I've got that there. It's a safeguard. If I ever want to search my staff, that's absolutely brilliant. But if you don't use it, there's no point in having it. You've got to use it. Even if you do random searches every week, you need to have evidence that you're doing them and document them in a notebook and say, on this date we do random searches. What you don't want to do is have the search policy in there, never ever use it, and then suddenly use it. Don't just put things in place and don't use them. And train your staff as well. So the tick box scenario is what I call that, when people just put things in place because the law says they've got to, but they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They just put them in place. So, and also I meet people every single day. I've helped tens of thousands of businesses now, and I help people every day, and some people operate without anything in place. They've had staff there for donkey's years, and they think, why change what isn't broken? Because I tell you what, there's penalties if you haven't got certain things in place. If you haven't got things in place, such as stating the main terms, you're not issuing them after before 8 weeks, you've got a big problem here, because if you do end up in a tribunal, you know what, the average payout just for that is £1,400. So you've got to make sure that you have things in place, because it makes your life simpler, because you will have a problem, mark my words, later on. And then we get people that aren't consistent. One rule for one rule for another. You know, this really links in with favouritism. And then emotion. If you don't like a member of staff and they end up leaving, you're absolutely happy about it, so you don't follow a procedure. You've got to follow procedures. Not keeping up to date is another reason why people end up at a tribunal. Not having the right information at the tips of their fingers, not keeping up to date. Things are way beyond repair. They've had the same documents in place for 10 years, 5 years, and they've not got the ACAS code of practice in place. They don't take their staff seriously when they make a complaint, and they're not putting or following their own procedures, or they're not complying with the working time regulations, which is the biggest complaint in tribunal. So we're looking at breaks here, holidays, etc., and they're not complying with that. So those are the reasons for the tribunal. So what makes up the contract? Well, first of all, we've got implied terms. And implied terms, these are what have not been specifically set out by, these have not been specifically set out or agreed by the parties. Terms might be implied because they are too obvious to mention, or because parties assumed they would be incorporated into the contract. An implied term may be that the employee will serve the employer faithfully, and that the employer has a parallel duty not to destroy the relationship of trust and confidence between the employer and the employee, mutual trust and obligation. Express terms, these have been expressly agreed by the parties, either orally or in writing. And then we've got incorporated terms. These may become part of a contract through statutory provision or the terms of collective agreement. An example is the equality clause incorporated into every contract of employment by the Equal Pay Act 1970. And then we've got, you know, what makes up the contract continued. We've got the statement of main terms. The statement of main terms, for me, is the most important document as an employee. You know, I'm not going to take a job with you unless you give me a statement of main terms. This tells me where I'm working, how much I'm getting paid, location, etc. I'm going to talk about that with you later on and what to include in that. By the way, I can't run my life without a statement of main terms, because I don't know where I'm working, how much I'm getting paid, etc. So when I get the job, I can't actually tell, if I haven't got a statement of main terms, how can I run my life and arrange childcare, for example? The statement of main terms should be sent out really with the job offer letter. So then we got the job description. The job description forms part of the contract, because this will be used later on when we actually work with somebody during their appraisals, their one-to-ones or KPIs. So a job description is essential to get you the right person for the job, and should be written at the stage when you're actually advertising. The advert forms part of the contract as well, what you say in that. And what you say in the interview, be careful of what you say in the interview, as this can form part of the written statement of main terms. Employee handbook, staff handbag, staff handbag. Is there a staff handbag? Right. Employee handbook, a staff handbook, you might know it as. These contain the conditions of employment. We're going to talk about that later on and what you should include as well. Separate policies and procedures. Lots of companies have separate policies and procedures hanging about. Don't like that really. I like everything to be simple because I like things easier. I like to have my handbook and I like to have my statement of main terms and I know where I stand. I like to have my health and safety policy and the procedures as well, and I know exactly where everything is, and so do my staff. Documents, paper form or intranet. If you do put everything on the intranet, make sure everyone has access to it, including your cleaners that might not use the intranet. And at Peninsula, we do like simplicity. I particularly hate paperwork. I like things really simple, and I love things that are online. So terms and conditions and employee handbooks can be stored online. So what should you include? So what does the contract cover? The content of each contract will depend on the nature of the business. So remember that. You know, when I'm particularly writing a contract for care, that would be different to what I'm writing for a nursery. It would be different to what I'm writing for a shop on the high street or a chip shop or a retail unit or a catering department. And also the job which is on offer as well. Standard terms and conditions, and also there should be elements of legal required legislation and procedures, and additional protections can be written into the contract which can provide protection which are extremely valuable to a business. And as I said, it's about growth and saving money, so garden leave, restrictive covenants, protection of assets can also be included, and we're going to talk about this later on. I'm going through the first part at the beginning to say what should be covered, and then later on I'll tell you what should be included. So things to think about when you're drafting your contracts, making sure all the elements are included in a contract that are required by law. So remember 2004 was a major year. Don't if you remember it because it's a long time ago now, but that was the most amazing change for me. This is where it said to employers, you have to have disciplinary routes in place, different disciplinary rules and procedures. We now know this. It used to be called the Statutory Dispute Resolution Procedure. It's now called the ACAS Code of Practice. And this says that you have to include legally written rules for disciplinaries, investigations, appeals and grievance procedures. So by law, you've got to have that in place. If you haven't got contracts, where the hell are you going to put it? And if you're in a tribunal, there's penalties for that again. Use a separate employee handbook to include all of the other rules, procedures, so that the actual statement of main term document is not hugely long. I like it to be short and simple and snappy, and we're going to talk about that shortly, and then we're going to talk about the employee handbook. So I like to keep them separate statement of main terms, because lots of different people within your organisation have different statement of main terms anyway, and the handbook, we want that separate because most of these rules apply to everybody. Be careful when making things contractual, because this means you will have to honour it in all situations. It might be better to make some things discretionary, like bonus schemes, etc., which will retain some flexibility for you. Keep contracts under constant review to keep them updated with change in technology and society. Example, social networking, its impact on the workplace. We've seen the social networking policy change repeatedly throughout this year, but also as well changing technology, trends and legislation. Keep an eye on your business. If things are happening where suddenly everybody's being late, then change the lateness policy. If things are happening where people are ringing in on sick on Monday, you might want to look at the shift pattern. So keep an eye on what's happening and patterns that are emerging. Consider what you want your rules and policies to be in advance so you can publicise this. Employees know where they stand then. Makes life simpler. Make all contractual documents available to staff. You can't expect someone to follow rules if they have never ever been given a chance to read them. So this brings me to the induction really. So really setting the scene at induction and getting people to sign. And that's when people are readily going to sign everything anyway. So you've heard me say the statement of main terms. This is the piece of paper that says, you know, my terms of employment, and there's a penalty, as I said, for not issuing this within 8 weeks. I like to see it go out with a job offer letter after you've advertised, and the statement of main terms, there's a penalty, as I said to you, for not issuing it automatic of around about on average £1,400. The statement of main terms really should include the name of the employer and the employee, okay? And it will say when the employment began, and it will also have mention to, you know, previous counts as part of a continuous employment. It'll mention the job title. It will mention the place of work and the date when the employment began. It will talk about the basic salary, and it will talk about excuse me, commission, if applicable, to staff, and also how that's paid. It will talk about the benefits, sort of like a company car, private health cover, etc. It will mention, and this is a big change, so you need to write this down, and this is applicable to everybody. The Pension Act says that the statement of main terms should include the pension provider. So lots of you listening to me today, you know, you'll be listening to me and you might not have considered those changes to your already existing staff. You have to include the pension provider. And this is a great opportunity. If you've got to change somebody's statement of main terms, and you've got them in place, and you've got to change them to include the pension provider, and you have to have mention of pension rules in your handbook, this is a great opportunity to put policies and procedures in place that you've been dying to put in for ages. So pension provider, and then we've got hours of work. You need to mention your hours of work and what, you know, required to carry out their duties and achieve, you know, what their job role is. And it might actually be a minimum core hours mentioned under hours of work. And then we've got annual holidays. It would mention when the holiday year begins and ends. It will also say what the holiday pay entitlement is. It will tell you how it's accrued, and it will also maybe mention actually in the statement of main terms if they have to reserve part of their annual entitlement to take during the Christmas or New Year period. And also it will mention if you haven't accrued sufficient holiday entitlement to cover this period, you'll be given unpaid leave of absence. And it will also mention again other conditions relating to the taking of annual holidays, and it will give mention to the employee handbook and referring your employee to that. It will also mention public and bank holidays. It might mention that your holidays are inclusive of that. It might even mention that you get them as an additional payment. And it will talk about how they're taken and how it's worked out. It will also mention in the statement of main terms sickness pay and conditions. And also then it will go on to capability and disciplinary procedures, again in all these cases referring all further information to the employee handbook. It will mention the capability disciplinary and procedures, the capability disciplinary appeal procedures, the grievance procedure, and again, as I said, it refers all employees from their statement of main terms to mention that it is also further information can be found in the employee handbook. It would also mention in the statement of main terms notice of termination to be given by the employer, and usually under 1 month service it's nil. 1 month but less than 2 years service is usually a week. 2 years service or more is 1 week for each completed year of service, to a maximum of 12 weeks after 12 years. And then it will give mention again of notice of termination to be given by the employee, and then, as I said, mention of the pension and pension scheme. So that's what should be in the statement of main terms of employment, and that in itself would be a standard document that you write and fill in as and when. So then we've got the employee handbook. Now, what you have to remember with the employee handbook is to spend time studying your business changes and trends that are applicable to you and only you. Give thought to your business personality, and that's what I say. Imagine those people that have been in business for, 10, 15 years, haven't had contracts or employee handbooks in place, and they don't want to lose the personality of their businesses. They're about to put rules in place. They don't want to offend anybody, but I know from experience we put these in place every single day and we don't offend anybody, and the reason for that is you've got to make it simple. Write it in the Sun's language, don't write it in the Independent's language, don't include big words that nobody ever uses, and think about the personality of your company and don't lose that personality. And that comes across where, if you're putting handbooks in place, this is good news for everybody. These are rules because you know where you stand now, and there's some great perks and benefits in there. We're going to introduce stress policies, sickness policies, and make it a positive attitude towards the employee handbook. Put your business policy personality in there. Have an introduction at the beginning about how you monitor and manage equal opportunities, and really spend time on it. There's no point having policies in if you're not going to use them. Remember that. And don't copy for goodness sake, don't copy somebody's handbook because you know them and they work for the council, because you're going to inherit lots of rules that aren't applicable and actually cost you a lot of money. So include legislation and changes, and include policies you should have by law, such as the disciplinary rules and procedures and grievance and appeal. So the employee handbook, introduce policies that save you money and time. Don't think of these as all rules. A lot of these things come in and they can give your business routes to grow. Do you like that? Routes to grow? Routes to grow, but also to invest time in the policies and procedures actually can save you money later on, and save you time, spending time on absenteeism, sickness, capability, by having the right policies in place and knowing what to do. But also at the same time, employment law is about growth of business and control, and it's about having rules in place that save you money. You know, saving people a lot of money. And I can think of one straight away, sickness. By writing into your sickness procedure, if you don't meet your core hours in 1 month, you know what? You don't qualify for overtime. And that can stop people ringing in sick on a Friday or during the week and getting double time on a Saturday and Sunday. And I know I saved a company £25,000 by introducing that into their business. I know I've saved people money by introducing a wastage policy in place where their staff kept being, complacent and losing shutter keys and keys for the door, and and then they'd have to go out. It'd interrupt their evening. They'd be on call, and then they'd have to call out for a locksmith and get new keys, and it cost the business so much money. And then by introducing a wastage policy, nobody ever lost the keys. Isn't that amazing? Because they then had to pay. A wastage policy for things such as people being malicious, causing damage, causing disruption to your business, time stealing, wastage, light and heating, over-ordering of stuff purposely because they want to take the wastage home, all sorts of reasons, damaging your vehicle. I saved another company an absolute fortune, and I'm on about well over 30 grand in just damage to vehicles by introducing a wastage policy, by saying next time you damage the vehicle, you know what, you're going to pay for the wing mirror. You're going to pay for the dents and bumps. And the companies never seemed to go through their insurance policies. They ended up paying out of their own pocket. So I know that lots of policies and procedures I introduce save businesses money. These policies make for an easier life for the employer, HR, who already have a difficult job, and the managers. They ensure consistency and no ambiguity. They make sure you keep them up to date. Train your staff while they're there, and your managers as well, on how to use them, and include what is misconduct, and leave no surprises. So, policies to include. Let's go through a few of them that I think are absolutely brilliant. Right, equal opportunity speaks for itself, doesn't it? And I always say to you, don't I, at the beginning of my webinar, take a look at my picture, print it off, scare off burglars, do what you want with it. But, please don't superimpose it on any unsavoury websites, though. That I wouldn't be very happy about that. But equal opportunity, and when I talk about that photograph, the reason I mention it is because when you take somebody on, you know nothing about them. And there's lots of policies and procedures that you have in place to protect you against people you don't know anything about. And so I say, go back to the beginning, look at my photograph, and I look like your average British white worker. Yeah, I have such a varied family that, that's why we have the reporting procedure in place. I'm a working mother of 4 children. I have 2 grandchildren. I'm deaf. I've only got partial hearing in my left ear. I have a debilitating illness where I take medication 3 times a day. Can't see that by looking at me. I used to be rated the 3rd strongest woman in the UK back in the 80s. I used to power lift. I'm still a very strong person. Also, I have to do this on my hands. I'm doing it on my hands as I'm speaking to you. I've got an adopted Indian brother who's Hindu. I've got a sister who's married to a man from Thailand. They're strict Buddhists. She's also an artist and an activist. I've got a brother called Frank Gallagher. That's my natural maiden name, Gallagher. My granddad's called Frank Gallagher. My dad is. And my brother Frank Gallagher doesn't believe in God. He's an atheist, but he's also an activist as well. I've got a brother who's a traveller. I've got a brother that... I've got a sister that's Lulu, who's married to a man who's from Sierra Leone, and they're strict Catholics. I've got my great uncle is a Monsignor in Manchester. I've also got between 80 and 90 foster brothers and sisters, because my mum fostered hundreds of children in the 80s and 90s of all different disabilities, creeds, colours, religions, etc. And also I live in North Wales on a farm. I have my husband's settled 3 generations ago. He comes from a Romani gypsy family, and my children speak Welsh. And I've just walked into your door on day 1. Don't you think you need an equal opportunity policy? Because you don't know who you take on. and they might be offended by something that somebody says. I have to say, my family is really thick-skinned. You want to come to one of our parties, we have a right old laugh. But at the end of the day, we know when somebody's being nasty and uncalled for. And that's why you need a reporting procedure in place. You need it in place to protect your business against claims, but also to show that you take claims seriously. And if we're looking at the most up-to-date equal opportunity policy, we're looking at race, religion, religious belief, no belief, environmental belief, political opinion, affiliation, marital status, disability, gender, gender reassignment, age, sexual orientation, marital status. We've got all sorts of things to consider, and we need to write them down in a policy. And when somebody says, I'm not happy, we can provide evidence that we take them seriously and there's a proper route to follow. You know, we also need the personal harassment policy and procedures. We need those in place to protect our business, to show that we take things seriously. When somebody mentions something, don't think it's just a little simple, easy thing to sort out. Document everything from stage one. Get disciplinary rules, procedures in place, and the appeal and grievance procedures in place. You have to have them by law. Capability procedure because of age, because of training, because of ill health, short ill health, lack of dexterity, things you can't see anymore. Get that in place with a medical statement that says if you have a medical condition such as pregnancy, if you're taking tablets, if you're disabled, if you are having counselling, you're suffering from stress or taking medication, you have to let us know. And what this enables the employer to have is a true full picture in front of them, and they can consider it when they're making decisions such as capability or disciplinary rules. If they haven't got the full picture and somebody's not been honest with them, they've got proof that they asked them, and it's a defence statement for us. And then we've got sickness, absence. You know, every rules for sickness are different within companies, but one of the changes I'm making to documents at the moment is where people are saying, I don't like people texting in. Well, write it into your handbook then if you don't like it. A sickness policy and procedures route. And remembering that people accrue sickness when they're on holidays, when they're on sickness, a mention of that, and also on maternity, they accrue holidays as well. So holiday policy as well. What a canny employer does, or canny HR person or manager does, is look and analyse the holidays from the previous year. They look what's happening for the future year and when people might be taking holidays, and then they run their business around that. It's a good idea to write into your holiday request procedures what notice you need, what an emergency holiday is, about accruing holidays whilst off sick or on maternity, but also making sure that in the holidays that you might want to say when somebody goes off sick, whilst they're on a holiday, you require a sick note, and also as well things such as with the holiday policies and procedures, mentioning to save holidays for when it's quiet in your business. Excuse me, you might have a shutdown, so you can actually put that in there. And remember, when I talk about these policies, to include that you can have whatever you want as long as it's reasonable. That's absolutely acceptable. And remembering that to write something in place that says to your staff that I can actually force you to take holidays, which is great if you're having a quiet business and it's unexpected quiet time, that you can force people to take the holidays with double the amount of notice. I.e., if you want me to take a day's holiday, you have to give me 2 days notice written to take that. So holidays in itself is a massive policy and procedures. Breaks is different for every business. So we might say you might write into the break system that break rules that they have to wait for other staff to come back before they take their breaks. It might be that you actually have a separate rules for supervisors. It might be that young workers are always supervised, so you have to make sure that everybody takes their breaks together, so they're never left unattended. You might want to say, but if you say this, you've got to provide break facilities and cooking facilities, that you might want your staff not to leave the premises when they take the break. But if you're going to say that, you have to make sure that you've got to have catering facilities available. And remember, people lose tribunals on breaks because there's no rules in place. Lateness, a lateness policy, something like if you're more than 5 minutes late, we deduct 15 minutes pay from you. If you're more than 15 minutes late, we deduct half an hour's pay from you. If you haven't rang to tell me that you're late and you're more than an hour's late, I might actually send you home because I've actually got to get somebody in to cover your work. So having a lateness policy in there again gives you control as well. Things that you might not think about is statements to the media as well. This is like a safeguard for your business, and this is where you work in an industry that might be high risk. But you know, a mention to statements to the media, and it's just really to say any statements to reporters from newspapers, radio, television, etc. in relation to our activities will only be given by the director. So a mention that nobody can make a statement, and it's also, you know, it might be that there's been an accident at work, so just to cover that as well. Music and iPods, this is a massive one at the moment. Music in the workplace, mention of music, saying that actually we don't allow music, or we do allow music. But I think to look at areas where it's a safety risk, where people work in a manufacturing environment, a loading bay area, and they actually have iPods on, and they can't hear the fire alarm. So think of that when you come to your fire evacuation drills as well in health and safety. It's a good idea of mention of the use of iPods. And then smoking, setting out and setting the scene where smoking is tolerated in designated areas and what happens if they smoke in non-designated areas. And then a hygiene policy as well. And then a stress management policy is a safeguard as well, because in certain industries it screams out to me that there should be a stress policy, such as working in the care industry, with children. It might be working in a funeral or a hospice. And so, you know, a stress management policy might be a very simple one, where in an office environment, but in those particular industries, it might be a little bit more in depth. And I'll just give you sort of an overview on what a stress policy might have, or a stress management policy. It might just mention that you're committed to protecting the health and safety and welfare of your employees. It'll give mention to recognising that workplace stress is a health and safety issue, and acknowledge the importance of identifying and reducing the causes of stress in the workplace. The policy applies to everyone in the organisation really, and employees are responsible for their own health and safety and that of their colleagues. Managers are responsible for the implementation of the policy, and the company is responsible for providing the necessary resources to carry it out effectively. A definition of stress. Stress has been defined as the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressure or other types of demand placed on them. The definition helps to distinguish between pressure, which can be positive and motivational if managed correctly, and stress, which can be detrimental to health. The policies and procedures outline the responsibilities of the company, management and employees in ensuring that excessive pressures are minimised, and in the event that an adverse reaction arises, that stress is managed effectively. Lots of companies now are relying on employee assistance programs to manage stress and sickness, and also other issues outside of work. I know that the Stress Management Society actually endorse our employee assistance program. Also, it mentions what the company's responsibilities are. It should do in the stress management policy. It goes through that, what the management responsibilities have, and what the employees and what the procedures are. So that's the stress policy. I can't go through the whole policy with you today because we've got 45 minutes. And also mention of personal details. You need to have that in there, because when you first have an induction, people give you their name, address, telephone number, etc. But people move house. And what if people work all over the country and they have, you know, an accident? So you delegate responsibility to your staff to let you know of personal detail changes. It's up to them to tell you, not up to you to find out. Some companies have the time to send out an audit once a year. You might want to do that as a matter of, sort of procedure, but some companies don't have the time to do that, and so it's about delegation of responsibility to your own staff to say, when your personal details change, you have to let us know. And that way as well, during the disciplinary procedures or letter writing stages through any procedure within a company, you've got the right address and you know that you're actually sending out the right details to your staff. Okay, so then we go on to wastage, which I spoke about earlier on. This covers people that might be, the wastage policy is there to save you money. Lots of these policies save you money anyway. It's a safeguard. It makes sure that that people who are maliciously damaging property, you have the right to take money back off them because of it, and you have a proper written procedure for wastage and what it entails. Also, a search policy is a policy you may have heard me talk about many times before. A search policy allows you to search your staff if you think they've been stealing, taking drugs, alcohol, drinking on the premises. It might be that they're using their mobile when they shouldn't be, or they've actually stolen some of your data and they've got it on a disk or actually on one of those sticks USB sticks in their pocket. So search policy, you can only carry out a search if you have a search policy. And for people that have delivery drivers or transport industry, you can actually write into the policy, you have the right to search people's lockers and your vehicle wherever it is in the country, or their vehicle if it's parked on your premises. You do not touch somebody. And remember, I keep saying to you, I'm giving you an overview here. And then we talk about a mobile policy. You know for sure mobiles are intrusive within the workplace. They are a health and safety issue. You can record staff. You know, you can actually video people. You can watch movies. And I say, just don't leave surprises for your staff. Have a separate mobile policy for work use of work mobiles and personal use. And make sure people know if you're taking rude pictures of yourself and sending it to your partner, we will be able to view those pictures because it is our work mobile. So don't do it. Don't send texts that are personal. Don't use it for personal use unless it's controlled and you're not using, you know, savoury sites, etc., and photographs. This is happening. Please make sure it's clear within the mobile phone policy. For people that are using the mobiles for private use, you know, that we're going to say, I don't like mobiles in the workplace. They're intrusive. You should be actually concentrating on your job, not on texting your friends and uploading information. So have a separate mobile phone policy there for personal use as well. And it's reasonable to say to somebody, you can't use your mobile phone in work except for during your break or lunch hours. It protects your business anyway, and you want complete focus when somebody's there. And if anybody moans saying that, actually, I need somebody to contact me urgently, you know, well, what would they have done in 1981? That's what I say, and that brings me to making sure that personal calls, you give them a number where people can contact them in an emergency. And you make mention of that in your handbook as well. The internet policy, talking about internet, I would definitely have an internet monitoring policy where you monitor emails, internet use, and you actually say that you've got the right to monitor anything that happens on your workstations. So make it, you know, I'm giving you an overview. That's a very in-depth policy that needs to be kept up to date alongside social networking. Just not, you see there, I've not just put Facebook here. I put social networking, Instagram, you know, we've got lots of different, the next best thing, Google, LinkedIn, etc., blogs. So make a mention that, you know, it's not unreasonable to say to your staff that they can't mention their employer. They can mention the industry, but they can't say who they work for. They can't talk about your friends or your clients on any social networking site. They can't bully staff. It's not a problem to say that. That is reasonable to say that. So make sure that if you do let your staff put things on Facebook about your company or your LinkedIn sites, that it's controlled and there's an avenue of where everything's audited. And then company car policies, the use of, and also driving licenses and points, etc., and how they notify you. And then salaries as well and how they're paid, when to expect payment, etc., and overpayment. And remember, one of the biggest complaints in tribunals is illegal deductions from salary. So you need to make mention of the fact that you have the right to deduct money from people's salary. Obviously, there's clauses with this and what you're deducting, but you have the right to deduct overpayments, overpaid holidays and salaries, to make sure that you mention that there. If there's no mention, it can be illegal deductions. And health and safety and welfare as well. Uniforms, standards of dress is how I expect you to dress. And usually the general rule is if you give uniforms, we give them 3. 1 in the wash, 1 wear, 1 dry. That's generally the rule. And if it's weather like today, you might want to give them 28, you know, uniforms, because they're not being funny, you can't dry it unless you've got a dryer. So 3, 1 in the wash, 1 dry, 1 wear. That's generally the rule. And what your standards of dress are. Mobility. Mobility is a brilliant policy to have in place with mention of mobility. Just to give you an overview on that, it might mention that although you may usually be employed at one particular location, it is a condition of your employment that you are prepared, whatever applicable, to work at other locations. This particularly applies to maybe your consultants and sales staff, for example. This flexibility is essential to the smooth running of our business and is not necessarily an indication that we would ever require to live in a different part of the UK. You might want to mention job flexibility as well, and I would mention it as an express condition of employment that you are prepared, whenever necessary, to transfer to alternative departments and or duties within our business. It gives you flexibility then. For example, during holiday periods, etc., it may be necessary for you to take over some duties normally performed by colleagues. This flexibility is essential as the type and volume of work is always subject to change, and it allows us to operate efficiently and gain maximum potential. So it's really essential to have job flexibility in your handbook as well, and it allows you flexibility and control. And then mention of maternity, maybe not a maternity policy, but a maternity statement. So saying when a female employee becomes pregnant, she lets us know written at the earliest stage possible. So it's protective in itself as well. And family-friendly rights, and maybe mention dependence leave, paternity rights there. And that I would just give an overview there and say things like, as per the current statutory entitlement. And then we go on to other employment, which forms a huge part of the working time regulations and other work, because you are the main employer. You are responsible for any knowing of any of the work they've got. So how about a clause in there that says if you want to work elsewhere, please apply in writing, or you can't work elsewhere, but whatever's considered reasonable for you. And then mention of the bereavement leave. So other policies to include: by law, anti-bribery. I think it's a very good idea to mention that they can't take bribes. And again, I'm giving you an overview here. Protective disclosures, what happens on termination of employment as well, and you might want to include garden leave there in case somebody's going to a competitor. It might be that and they are on paid leave there. They work the notice at home and they're available, but to protect your business you might have to put them on what we call garden leave. And then return of property as well, what happens at the end of employment. You might want to mention exit interviews there as well, and mention, as I said, of the pension rules. But remember, during this overview on what to include into contracts, remember each is a heading of a section that is then broken down and written applicable to what works for your business, organisation or charity. So remember that. I'm giving you an overview here today. So if you have got contracts in place and you want to make changes, and remember the Pension Act has given you a great opportunity to do this, because you're going to have to update the Statement of Main Terms and the Employment Law Handbook anyway, it might be a time to get some legal help on this. But remember, if you're making any changes, there isn't a legal minimum consultation period for invoking a change if the employee agrees to the change. If there's less than 20 people are affected, then there is no minimum consultation period. However, it's really good practice to have a consultation period, and tribunals look on employers favourably for doing this. And remember, if you're a Peninsula client and you're listening to me, that is what you're using us for. I don't want you sitting there writing contracts. I don't want you struggling to write policies or update policies you've already got in place, or actually put changes in. That is what you're paying us for. For goodness sake, you should be using us for that. That is what we insure you for. So let us do that for you. Let us take away the work for you. Let us do that. And letter writing, adverts, etc. That is what we're there for. So remember, I'm giving you an overview. Remember to keep up to date with what the law says and include legislation changes. And if you're listening to this and it's 2028, check the presentation date when you're listening to this recording on YouTube. It might well be out today. Today, I can't even remember what the date is actually today. I think it's the 16th of October. I can't remember. Sorry. It is actually, it's Wednesday the 16th of October. It's currently 11:43. So just remember that if it is 2028 and you found this presentation on YouTube, because things hang around for a long time, make sure your procedures, your policies and your contracts are simple to read. Train your managers and staff on how to use the policies and procedures that you're about to write. Don't just tick the box. The Pensions Act, remember, is a great opportunity to put things into place. I hope you found my webinar interesting today. I'd like to thank you for listening to me. As I said, later on this afternoon, you will be able to access the recording of this webinar and also the slides. And the contact you need for that is www.youtube.com/PBS Press Office. Also, excuse me, I'm about to struggle there with my breath. If you've listened to me today and you'd like a personal webinar for your clients, you'd like some editorial writing for a magazine or a website that you host, you can contact me at this following address, amanda@peninsula-uk.com. And if you'd like some free advice or you have an issue later on, write down this number. If you're not a Peninsula client, you may not need it now, but have it have it by the side of you, and if you ever have a struggle with a problem or you need some help, this is the number. Give us a ring, we'll give you some free advice. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary actually this year. We've been operating for 30 years now. We are still a family run firm. We were set up on the back of our director having a tribunal which he lost out on. He learnt from that. And we now integrate ourselves within 26 businesses throughout the UK. The bread and butter of our company, small to medium-sized businesses, the ones that sit there struggling with writing policies, contracts and procedures. And as I said, write down that number. You might need us in the future. You might need us right now. I hope I've helped you today, and I hope that you've enjoyed my webinar, and I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you very much for listening to me, and goodbye.